This is like a slow motion genocide that's going on. I call it a silent killer, because in the last 2 years we've seen the drama, the horrors of what have happened in Gaza. Bombings and starvation, whereas in the West Bank, it's been very slow and insidious. They ended up killing Christine Saada, the 12-year-old daughter, in the car there, because they said, we thought it was a car of militants, and it wasn't. So when it says, even though that was supposedly an area that was supposed to be full control of the Palestinians, the Israelis could bring their military vehicles in, and incidences like this happen. Within the urban areas, people are encircled like a prison. But now we have the problem, this increase over the 25 years of those religious, ideological settlers, a strong nationalistic idea that ignores the rights of other people, that they have the right to all that land. Theology says that we have to support Israel and build the temple. But doesn't your Christian theology also tell you to blessed are the peacemakers, and love your enemies and work towards peace? So in a sense, everything will be, the Church of Nativity and Holy Sepulchre will become like museums rather than places of prayer. My heart is always in Palestine, but over time, I came to appreciate the sacredness of that land, of where Christ lived. There's something palpable where where Christ and the apostles lived and acted.
What do you believe is spiritually at stake for Christians everywhere if Christianity's birthplace loses its indigenous Christian communities?
It'll be a declaration that the people of the world don't really care about Christ and his message. Because if you did, you would honor that place. And we're not doing that.
Today's conversation is one few Americans ever hear, and yet my guest is herself an American who spent years living inside the Holy Land, witnessing what cameras and headlines miss. This isn't theory, it's lived experience. Let me tell you who she is and why her voice matters. Mother Agapia is an Orthodox nun who lived for 10 years in East Jerusalem and Al-Azariya, witnessing the daily realities faced by Palestinian Christians. After leaving under political pressure, she has spent nearly 17 years serving at the convent of St. Nicholas in Owego, New York, leading youth retreats, organizing pilgrimages to the Holy Land, and hosting young Palestinian Christians each summer. She still maintains deep connections with families in the West Bank and speaks from lived experience and also first-hand accounts about the impact of both secular and Christian Zionism on the region's indigenous Christian communities. Mother Agapia, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Susie.
Mitera, mother, with that background in mind, I'd like to begin at the human level, the everyday reality that you witnessed on the ground personally.
Well, that's a big story. It's a long trajectory from 1996 when I moved to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem. The first year I lived in the convent on the Mount of Olives, and as a good nun, good Claudia, never really went out of the monastery gates very often. Lived a life of prayer. But in 1998, after a year and a half there, I was asked to run our school. The Russian church had a school in Bethany, where Martha and Mary, Lazarus's tomb, was right down the road. And it was there that I began to really become in close contact with the Palestinian community, both Christian and Muslim. And for the first, till 2000, things were relatively peaceful. We were only 2 miles away. Just to illustrate everything, our convent was on the Mount of Olives, right across from the Dome of the Rock and the Wailing Wall. And the first abbess there in the 1930s would go on her donkey to Bethany, down the mountain. After September 2000, when the Intifada broke out and Sharon had gone on the wall, things began to change, and then they began to build a wall separating Bethany or Al-Azariya from Jerusalem. So that was the start of our problems there. I mean, the occupation had always been going on, but it was a time of relatively peace before then. But once after 2000 came, the Israelis became much more serious about establishing checkpoints, making it very difficult for us to be able to travel. We had Christian girls who were from broken homes from Bethlehem, about 10 miles away. And if I'd have to take them for a medical appointment, it could take half the day just to get there to do things. And you never knew what you were going to encounter from the soldiers on the road. So that was in 2000, and I remember writing to my mother at that time in the early 2000s, this is like a slow motion genocide that's going on. It was very clear behind us in Al-Azariya, they were also beginning to build the settlements, which means illegal housing of Israelis on West Bank land. And I mean, I don't know if you want to ask specific questions, but I could tell many stories particularly how that impacted the Christian communities. For example, one time I remember I was sitting at the home of a doctor and his wife in Bet Jala, next to Bethlehem, and their home was on the upper hills of Bet Jala, but they had land in other parts of the town. And suddenly the doctor gets a call. Nasser, they've taken our olive trees. The military is here and they're uprooting the trees. He raced over there, and this is all done without any kind of war. It was a military order in the West Bank. So this is just another illustration of how they just ramshackle over the people of Palestine. I mean, I could go on all afternoon with stories about those kind of incidences.
No, Mother, actually, during your years in the West Bank, I would like you to tell us what long-term structural changes did you see? Things like settlement expansions, land confiscations.
Sure.
Confiscations.
Yeah. I mean, that was a very clear based.
How did these changes affect families and communities? I mean, things like separate road systems and license plate discrimination. We know of the other things, but we actually have never heard of separate road and license plate discrimination. Could you elaborate on
that's the whole
long-term structural changes and how they actually affect families and communities?
Right. Yeah, the thing, I call it a silent killer, because in the last 2 years, we've seen the drama, the horrors of what have happened in Gaza, bombings and starvation, whereas in the West Bank, it's been very slow and insidious. And so what I'm saying, back these 25 years that I've been there, so very slowly, it started out where we were in Al-Azariya. First, cement cubes go up, and then eventually becomes a wall, making it difficult for us to travel to visit our convent in Jerusalem to go to services there. At the same time, Jericho was like 15 miles down the road. When I first went there was just a 2-lane road, and the settlement of Mali Adumim, which is considered part of Jerusalem, but actually further east of Jerusalem than Al-Azariya was a small settlement in 1996. Now it's like a huge city. And along with the settlement, and then that stretches, there's subsequent settlements, Kefar Adumim, Mitzpah Jericho, that go all the way, that is on West Bank land. When I first went there, you have the urban centers of Palestine, Bethlehem, Ramallah, Hebron, up in the north, Tulkarm and Jenin. And what is happening is that over time, all those urban areas have been encircled by walls and security fences and the checkpoints that were first sort of very simple and crude. Yeah. And you have people were jostling in position to try to get through a checkpoint. Now it's like something out of a modern movie. So the point is, in the early 2000s, the settlements continue to expand. So and they become very large over time, becoming like cities. But along with building the settlements, you of course have to have the infrastructure that goes along with that. So between Jerusalem and Mali Adumim, we'll just use this as an example, a settlement, you have the towns of Bethany, Al-Azariya, Abu Dis, and Isawiya. Little by little, we are encroached by more checkpoints and the wall on one direction. And then on the northern side, they built a highway particularly for Israelis, so that they can get from Jerusalem out to Mali Adumim, and those roads are not allowed to be used by Palestinians that don't have a Jerusalem ID. So that's the beginning of the apartheid system. And you have a case where, whether it's in Bethlehem or other cities, it's treated everywhere throughout the West Bank. The strategy is to encircle the large Palestinian towns, and then the Israelis control the going in and going out. They control activity within the cities to be able to travel if they want. There was always many raids. There was a very sad incident in 2002, I believe, where the Orthodox principal of the Jerusalem Patriarchate School, high school in Bet Sahur, Shepherd's Field, next to Bethlehem. Uh, they were traveling in Bethlehem one day, father, mother, and two young daughters, and the Israelis said they were in Bethlehem, and Israeli soldiers were there, and they dumped, they killed, sorry, yeah, they ended up killing Christine Saada, the 12-year-old daughter, in the car there because they said, oh, we thought it was a car of militants, and it wasn't. So when it says, so even though that was supposedly an area that was supposed to be full control of the Palestinians, the Israelis could bring their military vehicles in, and incidences like this happened. So you had actual killings. You have the confiscation of their property. I was starting to tell the story of Dr. Nasser, who they had property which is now that land has been taken, some of it, to create the tunnel road, which connects settlements, Israeli illegal settlements in the south of Bethlehem to Jerusalem. So, like I said, this pattern is repeated over and over again. Confiscation of Palestinian property, whether it's Christian or Muslim, to create an infrastructure for illegal Israeli settlements all throughout the West Bank. So this obviously this that's an apartheid system because it created roads that were only for Israeli citizens versus those from Palestine. The restriction of movement on Palestinians means it's a big drain on the economy. For example, in Taiba, you have a Christian town where Palestinians came back from the diaspora after the Oslo Accords were established, the Palestinian Authority was established, and wanted to create businesses for Palestinians so that they could be self-sufficient, have their own economy. One thing they did was establish a brewery in the town of Taiba. Small illustration of how the Israelis hampered everything. The goods for the beer have to come from Czechia, and you have to bring them to the port in Haifa. But that's in Israeli territory. There wasn't, the nascent Palestinian state had no borders of its own, no airport, no lanes to shipping. So they had to wait. So the Israeli government might say, yeah, the hops are going to sit on the port in Haifa until we decide to let them be released. So that inhibits the building. And then when they make the beer in Taiba and they want to sell it, they have contracts to sell even within Israel or other parts of the West Bank. They're basically 10 miles from Jerusalem in Taiba. The Israelis would insist, no, you can't just go straight through Jerusalem and go to Tel Aviv, which is 20 miles away, let's say, to sell your beer. You have to go 60 miles down the south to Hebron, go through a customs checkpoint there, and then come back 2 hours more north. So all these inhibitions, these are some of the minor things, but they're all the weapons of the occupation that are used to just strangle the Palestinians. And then you have the more direct incidences of people not being able to get, everything's based on permit. I remember seeing older women who have heart conditions and they're living in Bethlehem and they need to see a doctor in Jerusalem, and it's a question of whether the Israelis will give a permit for a few hours in a day for them to go. And then I witnessed with my own eyes those older women go to the checkpoint and then they're harassed by Israeli settlers, and maybe they can go through, maybe they can't. It depends on that. So, this has been 25 years of this that I've witnessed myself. So imagine the drain on a whole generation of people that they've gone through. And now it's even worse. I was just there last September, and this is what I mean that it's a silent killer. So all this progression of the building of the settlements, of the closing off of Palestinians one from another that inhibits their religious life, their social life, their economic life, has now become, it's almost like we're reaching the end of the plan. I said they're making it very clear that within the urban areas, people are encircled like a prison. I have a photograph that shows one day I was in Beit Jala, I had slept there at that night, and I wanted to go to the midnight service at the Holy Sepulchre. So I had a friend's car and I was going to drive into Jerusalem. As a foreigner, I wouldn't have had a problem getting through the checkpoint. And I come to the Maksum, the checkpoint. You have the big 24-foot cement blocks, and then you have sort of a barrier. It looks like someone's garage in America, door. That was sealed shut. So I couldn't even try to go through the soldiers to the checkpoint, which just illustrates the fact that basically these are just big open air prisons, each of the urban centers of Palestine now. So there's no talk about a Palestinian state because basically there are a few urban areas controlled by the Israelis. And now what's going on, what's in the press, the last 25 years, you've had a big increase in the what's the word? The influence of the religious zealot settlers. When I came there in 1996, Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister of Israel, had just been assassinated 6 months before. And Netanyahu came into power, and he was killed by a Jewish zealot. And that Jewish zealot, the people who are now ministers in the Israeli government, such as Ben Gvir and Smotrich, were followers of someone like that assassin. Back in 96, 97, 98, they were like the not very big influence in Israeli society. They were like looked even down upon, and people were moving towards the idea of peace. But now, obviously, these people are in the government, and these people are the ones who supply the weapons that they get from the United States. It's very clear. America, besides the big bombs and artillery shells, they also send rifles that are given that Smotrich has given to Israeli settlers in the West Bank.
Who sends
so
these?
what we have
America?
now is
America sends these?
absolutely
Rifles?
yes, yeah, 50,000.
Even
In the
the
last
rifles?
cash.
So it's true what we hear that settlers are not only given free home and land by the state of Israel, and they're also given free weapons to defend themselves
And
from
protection
the
by the government, by the army. Yeah, yeah. I guess, and also too, this is an important point. Now, because I worked at the school and we had boarding students both from the state of Israel, because I was part of the Russian church, and it's an interesting fact that Israel doesn't really like to highlight. When Benjamin Netanyahu talks about, oh no, Israel takes care of the Christians and the population has even increased,
Yes.
what he leaves out is that there's at least 2 million Russians, Israelis. But at least 250,000 of them are actually Christians, but they don't usually put that on the book. But for example, our Russian convent or many churches on a Saturday will be filled, even Greek patriarch, with Russians who aren't working that day from the state of Israel. So, and they're Christians, but it's not necessarily that they're on the books because they won't be directly persecuted, but it might cause them to be looked down upon by others, or they might not get a good job if they really advertise that they're practicing Christians in Israeli society. But the point is, we had girls from Russia and who lived in cities that are in the state of Israel now, and so I had interaction with them as well as the Palestinian Christians that lived on the West Bank. So I've driven nearly every road in Israel and Palestine. My point is that the settlements in the beginning, there was economic incentive for people to move into settlement homes. So they weren't necessarily ideological settlers. There's enough land within what is now the 67 borders, state of Israel, that all those 750,000 or how many settlers could easily be taken in the state of Israel.
Understood.
And my guess would be that at least 80% of them, if you said, okay, you have an economic, you can live in Hadera in Israel now with the same housing, they would move there. But now we have the problem, this increase over the 25 years of those religious, ideological settlers who have this belief that all the land of Israel, as they see it in their map that actually stretches to Lebanon, to Syria, of a greater Israel, which is really a fascistic idea, a strong nationalistic idea that ignores the rights of other people, that they have the right to all that land.
Yes,
and so now Israel has a difficult... Yeah, okay. So anyway, that's all I want to do is make the distinction between the settlers who are living there because they got a good economic deal. They were subsidized to live there, versus the ones who are now the ones who you see doing the attacks are those ideological settlers, and they're being financed and protected by the Israeli army and receiving weapons that come from U.S. dollars. And this is also part, though, of the strategic State of Israel plan. They've imprisoned the Palestinians in these urban centers, and then now when you hear all these attacks, it's sort of the open spaces where Bedouins were living, where you had people grazing. There's now the settlers are doing that same strategy. They go there and they chase a Palestinian off the land. They establish a trailer, and then pretty soon that trailer has a road built by the Israelis with electricity and water lines only for the Israelis. And in land that belongs to the Palestinians.
So we've seen videos on platforms like X of such takeovers happening.
Right.
And they are quite shocking. I mean, they just come without warning. They come in droves, in big hordes.
Right.
Most of them are very young people.
Yep.
And if
Yep.
Palestinians try to stand up against them, and they really, I mean, they are not being combatant because they know that
Yeah,
they would end
they get
up
arrested.
badly for them. Yes, they
Right.
try to stand up for their rights by talking sense to them.
Doesn't work.
It's as if they're talking to a brick wall. They are spoken down on with the harshest of terms, racist of terms, and at many occasions in such videos, you see the army standing in the background,
Sure.
basically enabling them by
Protecting
doing
the settlers.
nothing.
And even worse, I mean, I think it's even hard for people to understand how bad this is. So I was in Taiba, and it got a little bit of publicity in that town because in July of this year, settlers had come and had burned the brush around a fourth century church of St. George. And that got a lot of attention in the U.S. press because it was the idea, what are they doing attacking a church? And the U.S. ambassador, Michael Huckabee, came, who's a Christian Zionist. But he said, no, this isn't right, and we'll have to do something about this. And that same week, a Palestinian American, an American citizen, in a nearby village, had been attacked by settlers, beaten to death. And this is beyond being beaten to death. The army inhibited the ambulance from coming to try to help him, so that literally this is happening time and again over these past few months,
The only reason
where Palestinians have been attacked, and then they're not even allowed to get medical aid to try to help them to survive.
The only reason why this
Blocked by
even
the
got
Israeli
out
army.
in the open was because it dealt with an American citizen of Palestinian origin.
Right.
But
Yeah.
you are right. This is the norm, actually. But it shocked the Western world because now they heard of such things happening, and it only went out in the open because he's a U.S. citizen. Very sad.
Correct. Sadly, that's true. Yeah.
Before we move on, I've also wanted to mention that recently we've borne witness to videos on platforms again like X. I don't know how much longer X will be allowing these videos, knowing of what Bibi said in September when he was in that meeting with the influencers on the sidelines of the UN summit, saying that he wants to have a word with Elon about things going up on X. So we've borne witness to videos on platforms like X showing Israeli settlers from New Jersey occupying one of the last...
Brooklyn.
I want us to go back to focus on the Christians in Palestine. So it showed the Israeli settlers from New Jersey occupying one of the last remaining Christian villages in the West Bank. The name of the village still
In Taiba. 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 It's actually
Taiba.
biblical Ephraim.
How does
Christ
this
went to
fit
visit
into
there.
the broader pattern that you've witnessed?
Right, that's what I'm saying, is that so now Israel has built their large settlements and sort of encroached on and enclosed the Palestinian urban areas. So now you have that space in the West Bank that used to be Bedouins grazing the land, and where there was the farmland, the agricultural land in the Jordan Valley. That's all being taken over by Israeli settlers. So this, in a way, these violent acts are kind of part of the plan to chase off the Palestinians from that open land and move them away. So it's not as if the settlers are really acting in an independent, chaotic way. They're being protected by the army, so that the army then will say, the settlers, they protect them, they take more of the Palestinian farmland, open land, grazing land, and then it becomes a part of Israel. Under Israel.
Yes.
Illegally.
So let's move into something that you've already touched upon. You've spoken clearly about the contradiction between Christian Zionism and traditional Christianity. How have you seen Christian Zionist theology impact the lives of Palestinian Christians in real human ways, please?
Yeah. Well, a very clear thing is it's a sad, I'm not an expert in theology, or I don't have much connection to Protestant communities so much, but it's just shocking to me that they cannot realize their theology tells them we have to support Israel, we have to rebuild the temple. But the price of that is the abuse, persecution, forced withdrawal of the local Christian community. And a small anecdote that that makes you understand that they don't see a connection between the Christians who have been there since the time of Christ. I'm a good friend with one of the Orthodox priests in Bethlehem at the Church of Nativity, and they keep a sense of humor about. But he says, Americans come up to me and they say, "So when did you convert to Christianity?" Now we're sitting in Bethlehem, where Christ was born. This family has been there for centuries, and an American Christian Zionist is asking him, "When did you convert?" So there's this big disconnect between the people there that actually live as Christians in the place where Christ was born, died, resurrected, and preached his gospel. Um, and also too, what is sad to see, I've seen sometimes at checkpoints Americans who are obviously Protestant Christians, and they would be joking at a checkpoint with the Israeli soldiers. So they see themselves one in concert with them, and they'd be witnessing the story I told you about the older woman trying to pass the checkpoint, Christian woman, Bethlehem Christian woman trying to pass the checkpoint. This is an American Christian thinking that's okay, that she's harassed at the checkpoint, and that there's even a checkpoint celebrating Bethlehem from Jerusalem. So I honestly am perplexed on how to address that issue. There is hope, because I think some people you're going to find are so blinded by their beliefs that it's in Orthodox Christianity we call it praylist, the in delusion that maybe only prayer can sort of break the wall of certain people to be able to understand what they're doing. But I have heard there's a group called Telos Group, TELOS group.org, and it was started by an evangelical Christian who was a Republican who worked on religious freedom and witnessed what happened in the early 2000s, and along with an Orthodox Christian man. And they've made a lot of inroads into the evangelical Christian communities in America. And I think the way they do it is by, first you have to present the story. That's one thing Israel has been very effective in. The mainstream media doesn't tell you what's really going on. We're fed this narrative that it's all a Muslim-Jewish conflict, the Islamic terrorist, which I can witness to is not the case. The issue is not with Islam, the issue is with the Israeli occupation. But people have been fed a different story. So what you have to do is take them beyond the wall and get them to meet the local Christians, and then also appeal to their basic Christian values. Again, like I said, okay, your theology says that we have to support Israel and build the temple. But doesn't your Christian theology also tell you to blessed are the peacemakers, and love your enemies and work towards peace? So you just have to keep pushing on those points.
Mother Christianity also teaches that God has no chosen people, like you just mentioned.
Right.
You made reference to,
Sure.
and that the gospel is universal. Yet Christian Zionism in the U.S. is rooted in Schofield's teachings. It promotes the idea that bless Israel and you be blessed, curse it and you be cursed. A belief that many say helped empower and expand the modern state of Israel.
Sure.
Do you agree with this?
Well, and also that's just a misconception too, because as Orthodox Christians, Christ, the new Israel is the church. The Messiah has come, and in the state of Israel has nothing to do with the Israel of the Bible that these Christian Zionists are supporting. Yeah, I mean, so it's just like I said, it's either at a level of prelist and delusion with some people, it's so ingrained in them, or like I say, you come back to them and make them begin to consider what their faith is telling them, and does that really reconcile with the message of Christ?
Mother, you mentioned the Talos group, which is trying to make headway within the evangelical community. I wanted to ask you something in particular. Are you, as an Orthodox nun, seeing more American Christians begin to question and look toward Orthodoxy, maybe for clarity?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, there was just a story in the New York Times yesterday. I don't know that it has specifically to do with it. It may have, but it happened before what we've seen in Gaza. There's certainly been a trend of Protestant Christians moving towards Orthodoxy, and that's been happening for the last a number of years now. There was just a story in the New York Times the other day, and I think the last year and a half, I think the images that people have seen from Gaza, that finally some of the reality of what Palestinians have been experiencing in the West Bank and Gaza has become clear to people, that's made some Protestants realize that their Christianity was creating a big injustice and helping people to consider maybe we have to move on to something else. and they can find that in the Orthodox faith. Yeah, there's been a big change. And also, I think it's illustrated by the fact, I don't know if you're aware of, the state of Israel recently had to file as a foreign agent because they've put millions of dollars into a campaign now, hiring people in the United States, and they've targeted 4 states in the U.S., California, Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado. And they have a list of all the evangelical churches in those 4 states,
Mm.
and they're putting millions of dollars to remind them of their allegiance to the state of Israel. They're going to have things like, it's called geofencing, where anybody who attends any of those churches, their phone will automatically, without their choice, get messages inculcating the Israeli side of the narrative. And also things like putting virtual reality, have trailers with virtual reality and showing over and over what happened on October 7th. So if Israel has to use money like that to influence their strongest link, the Christian evangelicals, it's obvious that they understand that evangelicals are beginning to see things differently.
Well,
So
I think
that's sort of a positive in a way that Israel realizes that they have a problem even with the evangelicals.
yes.
And the encouraging thing too is you're seeing that many Americans on both sides of the political spectrum, for different reasons maybe, have Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's Republican, and Democrats who are now saying we're not going to take AIPAC money anymore. So there's certainly pressure bubbling up in the United States by the people telling their representatives, questioning why we're giving so much money to Israel and using it to harm the Christian legacy and just create a warlike situation in the Middle East instead of working to peace.
Yes. Very interesting what you just shared.
Mm.
It also goes, it fits in also with what Christian Zionist leaders had been using up until now. They've been using prophecy-centered narratives from Ezekiel to the Third Temple to portray political events in Israel as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
this how does this framing, how used to up until now, how did it used to mobilize American Christians by presenting political actions as part of God's timeline rather than human decision making?
Not quite sure I understand the question there. The problem is they've used politics
Yes,
to confusing theology with politics. And
exactly.
it's interesting.
You got it right.
Yeah. Okay. Best at but also, another, I'm not well versed in it again as well, but early on in 48, many religious Jews did not accept the idea of the creation of the state of Israel, because it's really along the same thinking, is that we're people of prayer, a people of God. We don't use the political institutions to achieve our goals. Our goals are spiritual ones, and they come from God and from our life of prayer. So the Christian Zionists, just like the religious zealots in Judaism now, have confused everything and understood things the wrong way and using political means to achieve spiritual goals.
Yes, that's true. Mother, I'd like us to go to change tangent a bit. I wanted to ask you something else that is a position of yours. Based on the realities that you've witnessed over 3 decades, you have said yourself that the future of the Holy Land Christians ultimately depends on decisions made in Washington. What do you believe American Christians and American policymakers most need to understand about how U.S. support shapes life for Christians in the West Bank? I'd like us to focus on the West Bank before we segue to my next question, which is a bit broader.
Yeah. Well, the main thing, like I said, that the problem is the occupation. And so the occupation is a political problem. And it's a problem that's being supported by U.S. dollars and U.S. diplomacy, protecting in the United Nations resolutions that would force Israel to come to the table or are always blocked by the United States. So if you're a Christian in America, from the first centuries, pilgrimage has been so important to the Christian, to especially Orthodox and Catholics, right? To visit the Holy Land, to come to see the holy sites. Right now, because of the effects of the occupation, the Christian population decreased dramatically, first of all, in 1948. From 10%, it's been down to nearly the 2% that it is now. So over these last decades, it has slowly dwindled because under the occupation, it's difficult for people to have work. So if you have an opportunity, if you're raising a family, your kids, you want a future for them, obviously the logical thing is you want to go to a place where they can live in peace and freedom. So the only way to get Christians, the living stones, to stay there is by ending the occupation and creating a Palestinian state that provides for equal rights and freedom for the Palestinian people to develop. Beyond those living stones is the reality that the state of Israel right now, under those effects of the occupation, are doing everything in their power to Judaize all of Jerusalem. So when people go on pilgrimage, there aren't going to be living Christians there, and it's going to be property that's protected more by the state of Israel. So in a sense, everything will be, the Church of Nativity and Holy Sepulchre will become like museums rather than places of prayer. And that's not what pilgrimage is about. The most gratifying moments I've had when I've taken pilgrimages is that I usually take young people, well, both old and young, but I'll ask a young 15-year-old, okay, we've been here for 2 weeks. What sticks in your mind? What was the most important part of the pilgrimage for you? And I'm always find it so lovely that it's happened more than once that a 15-year-old will tell me, I most appreciated going to the Holy Sepulchre and being at the tomb of Christ. And I can tell you, if it becomes a museum, a place where they're not serving the liturgy every day, where there aren't people going there immersed in prayer, that same feeling won't be there. And that's a tragedy for the world, the Christian legacy being disappeared. And the only way that that's going to be stopped is if American tax dollars aren't being put in political support, being to support the occupation. Instead, to stay to Israel, we want a political solution. We want peace for both you and the Israelis and the Palestinians, and put an end to this occupation and persecution.
Very clear, very clear. Mother, yeah. I want us also to briefly, just with this one question, to just touch briefly on broader, outside the West Bank. Mm-hmm. From everything that you've observed in the West Bank and through your connections across the region, do you see pressures on Christian communities as isolated or part of a longer-term regional pattern affecting Christians and Muslims in several countries? I mean, if we look to Lebanon, which is one of my two homelands, as you know, I am both a Greek Cypriot and a Lebanese, a Cypriot and Lebanese.
Yeah.
So in Lebanon, we recently saw the nearly 2,000-year-old mausoleum of the Apostle Simon Peter in southern Lebanon reduced to rubble, rubble, during Israeli military operations.
And we don't hear about it in the Western press. Yeah.
No. Well, it's you find it on platforms like X, as we said, but we don't know for how long. But in the Western press, no,
very briefly.
About it.
It's not.
No way. So how do you understand these wider patterns?
Oh, it's very clear. Look, if you go to the creation of the State of Israel and the first terrorists and militants that fought for that, they wore a patch, right? That shows a border of Israel that includes parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria. I had the opportunity to visit both Lebanon and Syria in 2004. And what I saw were vibrant Orthodox Christian communities. Both you had the keeping of the ancient sites, like you said, where St. Peter and Paul were. I was down in Sidon, I believe. There was a small church there. In Syria, where St. Simeon the Stylite, who lived in the 6th century. There's the remains of a monastery. But you also had vibrant Christianity today. Monks and monasteries and convents, summer camps going on. I visited Malula in Syria, where the nuns had been kidnapped by ISIS people. And this is the distinction that Israel uses to its advantage, and the West. I mean, it's a great shame that right now America just received Abu Jilani, the leader they've bestowed in Syria, who was a member of ISIS, who a year ago had a $10 million bounty on him. That's Islamic extremism. That's not the Islam of the local people. But it's part of that narrative to create the idea that Israel is under attack from these Islamic terrorists, when in fact they're probably the ones that have supported them in the meantime. So what you have is that there's this image of a greater Israel, and that includes going into Syria and Lebanon borders and taking it and becoming it part of Israel. And that's what's created all the problems, the conflict in that area of the world right now.
Lebanon has a big, vibrant Christian community.
Yes,
not
yeah,
just not just Orthodox, Catholics, Maronite, Greek Orthodox.
sure.
There are all these denominations, but they all
And they're
practice
part of the
Christianity.
society.
Yes, yes, and it's littered with
Mhm.
monasteries and churches. And let's not forget,
Sure.
Canaan, which is where Jesus performed his first miracle, is in Lebanon, my homeland.
Right. And the Israelis have been attacking those places. Yes.
Yes.
In fact, I don't want to use a name, but I met with a cleric of the Syrian Orthodox Church, and there's great pain now because of the attacks that Israel has done, or ISIS forces in southern Syria, and have killed Christians, Alawites. Yeah, and so this disorder is going on, and to the great detriment of the Christian witness in the Middle East. So what we're seeing is that, just in Iraq in the early 2000s, where most of the Christian population had to flee,
Correct.
it's just this is just continuation of that plan, and it's an outrageous that Christians in the West haven't done more to speak out. And so it's not the problem is, if anything, it's the Israeli grand plan and the extremist Muslims that are propped up by that Israeli state as well. That's the issue,
Let's not
not
forget
not
who's
Muslims in
behind
particular.
these groups, who propped them up, who was funding them all these years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very clear. Again,
And
if you live there, it's very clear that that's the situation. Yeah.
Mother, before we end, I'd like to go back to the circumstances that led to you leaving the Holy Land. You eventually had to leave East Jerusalem and Al-Azariya
Right.
due to political pressure from Israeli authorities. You witnessed violence.
That was one aspect.
You
Yeah.
witnessed humiliation, deaths, the collapse of Christian institutions. On Tucker Carlson, where your interview has become viral, Mitera,
Yeah.
you recounted being spit on, helping families cross checkpoints, witnessing deaths, navigating Israeli soldiers, scorn, and the collapse of Christian institutions, as mentioned. So
Yeah.
you've lived through events in those 10 years most people only read about.
Right.
Could you share one experience, one personal moment that best captures the reality that Christians still face in the Holy Land? One that stands out for you, a personal moment.
Oh gosh, the problem is that there's so many. I'm not sure how to answer that question. There's the poignant stories of, in the early Second Intifada, and a Palestinian woman who had her daughter, have her first grandchild. She was living in Jerusalem. She'd married a Palestinian Christian there, and she was not allowed to get over to see her firstborn granddaughter. So because I was a foreigner, was able to go there and sneak her through the checkpoint as an American. But this is one of the small instances, but the little pains that are on the people that you can't even carry on a normal existence, whether it's to pray with people or to be connected to your own families. And this is what the occupation has done. I guess the thing I can tell you about people getting killed outside our door, or all those kinds of problems, the drama of it, but it's also the simple reality of just being able to carry out a life as a human is being taken from them. And in spite of that, what's actually very inspiring to me is that in spite of all that, how many times I've seen the Palestinians act with such humility and long suffering. It's really something we can learn in the West. Because in spite of being persecuted, the way that they respond to it, all we hear about in the paper is what they call a terrorist attack. I can guarantee you, if an American was living under the situation that Palestinians live under, there would be many more terrorist attacks. The Palestinians have endured with resilience, with the samud, the word they call it, with a Christian humility, both Muslims and Christians there, of enduring because of their faith in God, keeps them going. But I think at some point, we in the West have to say enough of this, and we have to stand up and protect and support the Christians in the Middle East, in Palestine.
Mitera,
So I didn't really answer that question about a particular story because I think there's just too many
I
of them.
understand. It's very hard to just pinpoint it to one.
Yeah.
It's very clear that it's a lot. It's a lot to just
Or like I
single
said,
out.
I think one way to put it is to say that it's like a living death. I say where that resilience and that long suffering,
Yes.
Usually in war, death comes quickly. But what we're seeing is that, so I've seen for the last 35 years, imagine it if you're a Palestinian man, and like I said, that story about the olive trees being uprooted, and now that land is being used by another people, and you're not even allowed to go on that land. So it's like a living death. It's not like you're quickly killed by a bullet. You have to watch every day as your life is being taken away from you.
Okay.
I think that's the most poignant moment of it all, and just the depth of the suffering that they've undergone,
Yes.
and the ability to sort of be restrained, really, in spite of all that they've gone under, been under. And it's a shame that we aren't speaking up more and pushing, not just speaking up, but I say going to our politicians and say, this is not right. It has to change.
Mother, I wanted to ask you, when that plane lifted off, I know you still go on pilgrimages, but when you left
Right.
and you looked out the window
In 2006.
in 2006, after you were forced to leave, basically,
Well,
and you looked out the
well,
window, what was
wasn't.
going through your mind and your heart in that moment?
Well, my thought is that my heart is always in Palestine. Originally when I first went there, it wasn't with the idea of going to the Holy Land. I was going just to a convent community. But over time, I came to appreciate the sacredness of that land, of where Christ lived. There's something palpable where Christ and the apostles lived and acted. And so that's a very precious thing as a Christian to be part of. So there was the idea that one wouldn't be able to come back and experience that is very painful. But the most painful thing was, and why I continue to do the pilgrimage, is that my closeness to the Palestinian people. And I don't want to ever give that up. That was the most profound thing, that the idea that I wouldn't be able to go back into the homes of Palestinians again and share with them their joys and their sorrows.
So, Mother, you wanted to provide some fast insight about the Talos group that you mentioned earlier about making their insights into the evangelical community, if you please.
Yeah. So what they're doing now, they're initiating a campaign for Advent, for the beginning of Christmas through till Nativity, is to highlight the reality of the Palestinian Christians. Is they've started a red candle campaign where people are asked, including celebrities, to light a candle and speak a little bit about the Palestinian Christians. The first candle will be lit on November 29th in Bethlehem. So you can go to redcandle.org and learn more about it, become one of those people that will light a candle, pray, and advocate for the Christians of Palestine.
As we come to a close, Mother, you've said that what's happening is not only political, but deeply spiritual. What do you believe is spiritually at stake for Christians everywhere if Christianity's birthplace loses its indigenous Christian communities?
Yeah, well, I think you lose the reality of the experience of Christianity. And I think, I said this shouldn't be framed as a religious battle between Muslim and Jew. The real religious battle is over people who honor God. So how more basically do we honor God than honor the place where he was born and where he carried out his miracles and preached his message? So it'll be a profound loss for the world if it'll be a declaration that the people of the world don't really care about Christ and his message. Because if you did, you would honor that place. And we're not doing that. I mean, I don't think it can be any more clear than that. It's really a test of our belief. Do we really care about honoring our Lord, or do we care more about building up man's creation?
Mother Agapia, thank you. Thank you for sharing your witness with such clarity, courage, and compassion. Conversations like this matter, especially at a time when so many voices from the Holy Land are silenced or misunderstood. So thank you once again for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I hope we can all do our bit to help bring peace to the Holy Land. Yeah.
To everyone watching, if you found this interview insightful, I invite you to subscribe and share it. This channel is the only woman-led platform broadcasting from the Eastern Mediterranean in English. And from here, I can ask the questions Western hosts often cannot, not out of neglect on their part, but because hailing from this region gives me access to angles that Western interviewers simply do not see. Because you see, lived experience cannot be substituted. So if these perspectives help you understand this region more clearly, Please help amplify them by subscribing to the channel. Press the notification bell so that you receive alerts for our new interviews. And thank you for watching.